again, we're very glad that you're all here, and I'm going to turn it over to Teresa.
Well, my first thing to say was I expected maybe people would clap, and my joke says, I'm like a Metcalf cow on a cold morning. I appreciate a warm hand. I had to tell her that was my beginning. This program has been a long time in the coming. Actually, it was supposed to be May of last year. And we ended up in Washington with Joe having to have emergency heart surgery. So the program was set for February of this year. And it turns out our daughter had surgery. We had to go for a month to her and help with the children. So we set the date for November 14th. And I can tell you, I'm glad things don't come in threes. And we are all here today. But there's a problem with that. We kept doing more research. And the program is about 6 hours long. No, I promise, and it won't be. Let's see, get started here. I'm going to turn this just a little bit here. This is a beautiful drawing by Mrs. Slaughter, and we haven't really found Mrs. Slaughter, but a lot of people have this drawing here. It's funny how, since we've sort of started with the resurgence of Metcalf project, and I mean so many people with roots in Metcalf and who care about Metcalf, and like the courthouse who cared enough to give money to restore the courthouse, so many people care about Metcalf. And it's just a little place. How many people here are either from Metcalf or have roots in Metcalf or have worked in Metcalf or know the name Metcalf? I mean, really, most everybody has a connection with Metcalf. But see how small it is to be as popular as it is. It's really a drawing card. And you know, just so many people have come up to us and given us information and have given us pictures and all of that. So we really have felt blessed and do have a lot of information, and we've cut it down to what we could think today would be a decent length presentation. A lot of people used to say that you couldn't be a success in Thomasville unless you'd come from Metcalf. Has anybody heard that before? Well, they had, you know, a lot of people started businesses in Thomasville that were from Metcalf, Knapp Hardware. Neal's, you know, Elijah Neal had the farm, New Hope Plantation in that area. All Day and Sons, Thomas Drug Store, Watkins Motor Lines. A lot of companies were started by people in Metcalf or started in Metcalf and moved up here. And I see Dottie Gerard here, and she told me the other day, she said, well, I thought it was you couldn't be a real Thomasvillian if you hadn't come from Metcalf. But I want to just tell you before I start the history a little bit about how Metcalf was just magic in my life and why I got interested. Someone at a party the other night asked me, why did I get interested? I said, wait a minute, that's my talk, so I can't tell you tonight. But how I got interested in Metcalf would be that when I was a little girl, the most amazing thing that I did was go to Metcalf and spend the night. I mean, I'd rather have done that than go to Disney had it existed then, or, you know, play with the president's children in the White House. I mean, going to Metcalf was the most fun thing that I did. And we would walk downtown and get a knee-high grape. You know, that was the treat. But just going to Metcalf was very special, and I think other people have felt that way because when we give Lois Lanier Mason the award in a little bit, she had that same feeling, and she's actually opening her store in Metcalf tomorrow. So it played a lot of magic in a lot of our lives. And there were two grocery stores. Let's see if I can point here. Mr. Olin's was here, and Mr. Alton's was over here. It's no longer there. Mr. Olin's is still there, and very much like it was when it closed the door, with the old stove in the middle and the wide counters, you know, where they could cut cloth and so forth. But we would go down and we would go to Mr. Alton's store. because the Methodist shopped with Mr. Alton and the Baptist shopped with Mr. Horn. And Mr. Alton had a telephone. Now, I'm not sure if that was the only telephone for a while in Metcalf, but Mr. Alton had a telephone, and I have my mother's diary that she wrote 4 years in college from 1932 to 1936. And in there, she would tell about if she needed to get in touch with her parents, she would simply call Mr. Alton's store, and somebody would drop by that would get a message to her parents and say, so Mr. Alton sold a lot more than groceries. He was in the business, now that we might say the UPS or the FedEx store. Also, when I became a teenager, Joe got to experience a lot of Metcalf with me, and we would go down there for Sunday dinner, you know, the fancy tablecloth, the 5 or 6 vegetables, and the fried chicken. And I always said that fried chicken doesn't taste the same unless it's fried barefoot by Jeanette in the kitchen, because it was always just the best. Whoops. This is a sign on one of the stores that still shows a little bit. Well, what else did we do in Metcalf? My grandmother was always sewing, making wonderful linens. These are some from my trousseau. And she played the piano, and we sang all the 1910 songs. And through the years, Joe and I have carried Metcalf with us. You see the sign saying 8 miles. Well, when Joe would come down from Georgia Tech for a weekend, and he sometimes stayed with my grandmother, we knew he had to drive the 8 miles. So all of our married life, we've said, you know, we've measured things in Metcalfs, like, oh, we live about 4 Metcalfs from New York City, or, you know, wherever we've lived, we've measured in Metcalf. And then we had a pony down there named Fifi, and Fifi never went fast. She was just the slowest, proddingest, you know, pony you ever had. And the only time she went fast was when she was just about 1/2 a block from the barn. So we always say, like, Fifi going to the barn. So Metcalf has gone with us, even though we've been miles and miles away. So it's wonderful to come back and have a chance to work with Metcalf. Now, the generation above me grew up in Metcalf. They grew up on the farm, my mother and her brother. And, you know, this was life on the farm in Metcalf, in the Metcalf area in the 1920s, about 1924. And Mother kept a diary, as I mentioned, and she loved Metcalf so much that she said, in the diary, she said, you know, I'm loving that I can get an education, but I really don't want to leave Metcalf. And she was very close to her brother and her grandmother who lived with them, and she would be so homesick for Metcalf. Now, can you imagine? She just could hardly tear herself away from Metcalf. And then my uncle moved down to the farm there and farmed it for a number of years before he came to Thomasville, but I think he decided that trucking was a lot better than farming. So he came to town in 1939, and no one lived in the house where they lived from our family up until now. And it's still standing. It's just miserable shape, but we go down there and look at it. Robert and I went down there and filmed it for a family project, and we saw where a huge rattlesnake had just gone across the pecan. And so those 3 in the back were all born at the farmhouse in Metcalf. And then 2 generations above me were at the farmhouse in Metcalf. Look how they dressed back then with the old boots and the little hat. And my grandfather farmed his farm in the buggy. Now, this is just a sample of what everybody was doing in Metcalf in about 1914. And my grandfather grew watermelons, and the Horns grew watermelons, and they would load them down the tracks. And my first job was when I was 9, and I would crawl up there and put the stickers on the watermelons. You know, in the cars they had 4 deep watermelons, and then you would put the stickers on with this little flour paste. And so people who were, you know, real slim at 9 years old, you know, would crawl around and put them in. So that was my first job. And they also, a lot of pecans grown around there, as you know. Now these pecans are polished because there are machines that polish them and so forth. These are pecans from the 1950s, and I showed them to you because President Eisenhower came to right near Metcalf, you know, at Milestone Plantation, and he came hunting, and my grandfather was the self-appointed mayor of Metcalf at the time, and so he thought he ought to send a gift, and he sent the pecans. And it's funny, there's a right here behind me is an article about Ike coming hunting February 12th, 1954. So obviously when he got back, he didn't waste much time writing the letter, February 15th. And I don't know if this is the only letter from the White House that came to Metcalf, but we saved the envelope just in case. And would you notice it has the E in it? For anybody who thinks there shouldn't be an E in it, if President Eisenhower put an E in it, it's got to be. So my grandfather and grandparents there. Now, 2 generations above me, we're going to my great-grandfather. In 1890, he came to be a doctor in Metcalf. And it's kind of cute. They had some articles in the Times-Enterprise. Ruth Willett has been great in researching all these articles in the Times-Enterprise. And it said a Thomasville boy, you know, is going to make success going to Metcalf. So he rode around in his buggy and treated all the patients. And there was an article she found that told about one time he was going along and he ran over a big rattlesnake and said he was shaking so much that he was glad that his patient lived a few miles down the road, or otherwise he would have spilled the medicine when he poured it. So and this building where he had his office is still standing. It's right behind Mr. Olin's store. And Miss English had a millinery shop, so this was in about 1900 or whatever, that this building, it wasn't one of the original 9 buildings that we're going to hear about, but his office was in there. I wish it would, it's really going to fall apart any minute. It's on its last legs. And he married Emma Russian, and in 1890, and she unfortunately died in 1899 with 3 little boys. My grandfather said he remembered the 3 noses pressed against the window as the casket went down. But it turns out my great-grandfather was a measles carrier. He lost 2 wives that way. But the Russian family were long time in that area. And James Russian opened the 3rd store in Metcalf with his son, and later sold his interest to Frank Richter, his son-in-law. But there's Dr. Watkins with his 3 sons and so forth. This is in 1920. And later on, and he was kind of a feisty fella. Well, you know, living the kind of life he lived, getting paid in chickens and so forth, you know. But he in 1916, he was summoned to come and deliver his granddaughter. And, you know, he had seen my grandmother just a few days before, and he thought she was 4 or 5 months pregnant. And he sent the little boy back, and he said, you know, I'll come when it's damn time. Well, my grandmother, who never said a curse word in her life, because she was a minister's daughter, she sent back the word, it's damn time. And my mother came that afternoon. Now this brings me to Friendship Cemetery. Dr. Watkins and his wife and also his in-laws are buried right down in Friendship. But Sarah Beth, raise your hand. Sarah Beth has done this most marvelous research at Friendship Cemetery, and we have the brochures right up here. A lot of the cemetery is overgrown, and it's too bad, but it's about 3.5 miles south of Metcalf, and there are quite a bit of history just right in that cemetery. So at some point, the Metcalf Heritage Society is going to have an event, and Sarah Beth is going to be down there at the cemetery telling people. There's a Revolutionary War hero there. We can't find the grave, but we know he's there. It goes way back. Well, my great-great-grandfather built this house in 1890, and at the time it was probably the nicest house. Really, some nice ones came later, but anyway, this house still stands, and I wanted to say that Landmarks has repaired the roof so that it can stand. It was written up in the Red Hills book, as several of the houses were. The other side of my family, the Kindred side, this is the only picture I have of their house, but that house is still standing on Manning Street. And there was an article in the paper in 1891 that Ruth found about my grandmother Kindred, and she, before she married in 1891, this article was talking about a group of young people going to Lake Miccosukee for the day. Now this is Lake Miccosukee in 1930, but it probably didn't look much different in 1891. And they had written it up in the paper like it was just the most wonderful outing they would remember all their lives. So that's what people did in 1891 for fun. And of course they were well chaperoned. The paper was careful to say that. Okay, let's get into the real story of Metcalf. Metcalf is named, we're sure of it, for John T. Metcalf. And I've just gotten so caught up in Dr. Metcalf's life, I hope you won't mind if I tell you a little bit about him. But he was from Mississippi, and he was class of 1838 at West Point. And we lived at West Point for 3 years, so I could just imagine how he was there in 1838. He was a very good student, and he was such a good language person that he helped teach French. And because he was an assistant professor of French as a cadet, he did not have to drill. So he had a lot of free time, and what he did was play the guitar and write little ditties. And one of the ditties is called Benny Havens O, and Bill, I know you know that song. They've said maybe some other verses after, were written by other people later, but he wrote the original Benny Havens O, and you could walk down the street, anybody that ever graduated at West Point would know how to sing Benny Havens O, right, Bill? Right.
Fellows, and stand up in a row. To sentimental drinking we are going for to go. In the army there's sobriety, promotion very slow. So we'll tie our reminiscences of Benny Havens O. Oh, Benny Havens O. Oh, Benny Havens O. We'll sigh our reminiscences of Benny Havens O.
They said he was kind of a frivolous student, and his life was so different later that you wondered, but he still graduated in the top sections of his class. And then he went to command the arsenal in Augusta, and he had just been there about 2 years, and he contracted yellow fever. It mentioned in something I read that yellow fever came from Cuba to Charleston about 1838, and just sort of went on down the coast. And he unfortunately was one of the people infected and had to get out of the army and take a leave of absence. So he went back to Mississippi, and his father was a doctor, and he had a lot of fun going around with his father on rounds and learning about medicine, and he got to thinking, that medicine was really more appealing to him than being in the army. So he went to medical school at the University of Pennsylvania. And before he graduated, he took an extensive trip to Europe and went to Dublin and Edinburgh and France, several places in France. And then he came back to graduate, and then took another several months in Europe. And so he got to know a lot of the people, in the top of the medical knowledge at that time. And he had, meanwhile, decided he would practice in New Orleans. He had just searched everywhere, and that seemed to him the most interesting. He would go to New Orleans and practice. But his father said, no, I've got a place for you in New York. You're going up to New York. So his office was at Broadway and 10th, and he became a very noted clinical lecturer and was friends with all the top people, one of the first people to practice at Bellevue, and also on the staff of Columbia Medical School. So you can see just a really fine, well thought of person that he was well known throughout the country, apparently, according to our sources. So anyway, he married in 1845 and had 7 children. And unfortunately, his wife and 6 of the children died in 1863. So he married again, 1867, and it was some years later that he began coming to Thomasville. I think we just established it was somewhere in the late 1870s. We know that he bought property at Hardaway and Clay Streets in 1883, and he bought Susina and lived there for about 3 years, or owned it for 3 years. Brandy Ray was telling us about that. So that's Dr. Metcalf. Whoops. And his son wrote a letter in 1904 saying that it was really so special to come to Metcalf, and his son attributed his long life to that fact that he came, and he said it's like a wristwatch. You could wind it every year, and he could go for another year and come back in winter in Thomasville. And he bought a lot of land, apparently, in 1887 around Metcalf, about 1,600 acres. And he was just extolling the beauty of the little village in the pines, he called it. So that was his connection to Metcalf, and the people appreciated him and wanted to name the town for him. However, there was another name circulating, and that didn't pass, and that was called Lily Mitchell. Now, I don't know how you feel about the name Lily Mitchell, but Gal Baby said she'd like to open a cafe down there called Lily Mitchell just to remember that. But this is Gal Baby's great-grandfather, that's why I mentioned her. This is Thomas C. Mitchell. Thomas C. Mitchell and James S. Lilly gave the land on either side of the road for what we know now as Metcalf. The depot side was given by Mr. Lilly, who also gave the Baptist church, and the west side, where the stores were that you just saw in the picture, was that land was given by Thomas C. Mitchell, and he gave the land also for the Methodist church. Now, we don't have a picture of the Methodist church. The only picture we have is this was held outside the Methodist church in 1925. But the Methodist church was blown down in a tornado in 1935. But this is the new church, and it could not be built to the specifications of the original church because it was a depression, and that's just the way it was. And it was rebuilt by my grandfather Kindred and his son. And this is the interior of the church about 2 years ago. And just to the right here behind, there's a beautiful stained glass window in memory of some of the ladies of the church who worked tirelessly to keep that church going. And this is the beautiful Baptist church. It's the Friendship Baptist Church, named for the church it replaced out in the country. And it was built about 1890 and remains just as it is now, just in beautiful shape. This probably, you think this looks like the 50s with the cars, late 40s, early 50s. And it's just in great shape. And it had a camp. I don't know if any of you remember going there, but it had a camp. A Baptist camp, good. Somebody does it. Went for a number of, maybe a couple of decades down there. I remember Elva and Fred Scott Sr. were involved in the dedication of that camp. And it always had the Bible school, the Baptist church, through the years. Both the Methodists and Baptists always went to the Baptist. Now we get into the founding of Metcalf, 1888. The railroad came August of 1888, and that really made the town of Metcalf develop. I mean, it was no town before, it was just a crossroads. But Metcalf began developing at that time, and this, don't you just feel the energy, like everything's getting built, the train is coming, and it's just going to be a boom town. I love this picture. These are the stores, the very first ones, and there were 9 or 10, and you see the depot on the left. These were all opened 1888, 1889, and the first store to open was W.D. Stegall. That was a general store, and people have told me they thought it was a commissary before, it was something there, but that was really the only thing in what became Metcalf. And then we had Mitchell and McIntyre, and we had the Copeland Brothers store. Harry and his brother Claude Copeland and the brother-in-law Will Felkel, who's Dorothy Rigsby's grandfather, opened that Copeland Brothers. And it was interesting that Diana Duggan Neal did some research for the genealogy library and gave it to me. And in that was that Copeland and Brothers ordered every year they would order 1,000 boxes of overalls. And there were 12 overalls in each box. So that would be 12,000 overalls, right? And they gave them an extra 1,000 for making such a big order. So they sold 13,000 pair of overalls. I just can hardly believe that. Now, let's see, some of the stores changed names, and I believe it was Crenshaw that the Thomases became, the brothers Thomas came here. And this comes from the Roddenberry collection because all the invoices are to Mr. Roddenberry. But it's a wonderful thing to have W.B. Roddenberry, this collection, because you can kind of see what they sold, what the stores closed. They sold seeds and so forth. And here's Copeland. Now Harry Copeland built one of the houses you'll see in a minute, but he was the county commissioner also and very active in the town of Metcalf. The writing is nice, isn't it? Now we come to the sawmill. Hancock Brothers had the sawmill. Well, I should just tell you the names of the other stores. We had Monfort and Stringer, Monroe and Wheeler, R.H. Manning with Mr. Connell, who then broke away and opened his own store, E.F. Connell and Son. And Hancock Brothers had the sawmill a little bit out of town. It was moved into the town, and I think it was just to be near the railroad. And later on, when you see this picture now, this is when it was already Caldwell sawmill. And this is John T. Caldwell. Don't you just love his car? It's a 1916 Cadillac. Now that's not Metcalf behind him. I don't know where he was when that was taken, but in a minute you'll see a picture of his daughter, one of the, I think the prettiest girl from Metcalf. These receipts are just wonderful that we're able to have and see how things looked. But Albert Winters in 1890 wrote a number of columns about Metcalf, and he was just saying that, you know, how many good men had come to open these stores, and he predicted prosperity. And then the stores changed names, and the names still carry with us that we remember today. Horn Brothers, and this was Mr. Elmer's store on the corner, the one that had the Orange Crush sign. This was the original Horn Brothers, and that building is just in really bad shape, and unfortunately the bricks are not good enough that it can be repaired well, so that's going to be a problem. I think the best case would ever be that you would build a wooden building with just the store front, if that's to be preserved at all. And this is how the stores looked about would you say with the car, you know, maybe 1930-ish. And a front porch of Mr. Alton's store. Now we come to the houses that were built about the same time. This is the Crenshaw Copeland Thomas house. Mr. Crenshaw built the house in 1890, and Harry Copeland bought it from him in 1895, and his daughter, Isabel Copeland Thomas, was born in that house in 1897 and lived there all of her life. This is she, and her husband, Gruber Thomas, he was a county commissioner too. And it was interesting that I read in the 1920s or so, people like Mr. Copeland that had a lot of land that he'd inherited from his father, who had farmed in that area. Anyway, they began selling them off to Governor Edge of New York, you know, to the Hanna family, to other people from the north that were coming. And so the old thing of plantation and sharecropper began changing, and a lot of people were just merchants. So Mr. Copeland became pretty much a merchant with a smaller farm, and he sold to Narias. People say Narias, Narias? Narias. Narias Plantation. And this is Narias Plantation, about 1930, the windmill pond with the little houses. Isn't that cute? So things were changing, you know, in about 1920, and the people had less farmland, and the people of the north had more farmland, or hunting land, or whatever. This is another lovely house, Dorothy and Julian Horn's house. And Dorothy was the one that started in 1972 or so, the first Heritage Society. That's Julian when the day it snowed. And this is a little house across the street from him, and I put this in there because it's the house that my parents lived in when I was born. So I lived here 9 months of my life before I came to Thomasville, so I can really say I'm a Metcalf person. And my grandparents moved in from the farm in 1934, and they lived in this house. And these pictures were all taken by Julian Horn after church in 1951. It's a wonderful collection of the people in town. Now this is Tom Harrison's house in the back, about maybe 1950-ish. And you'll see it today, how nice it looks. They've just done a beautiful job with it. And then the Connell house. Remember I said Mr. Connell was in business with Mr. Manning, then he came out on his own with his father. And this is the Connell house. And Mrs. Connell was walking home from church in 1951. And she was one of my favorite people to visit with my grandmother. We would go over and visit her and just spoil you, you know. And this is the Horn house. There were two-story houses in Metcalf. The Copeland house you saw, and Copeland Thomas house, and this is the Horn house. And I wish we could see more of the house, but we chose this picture because Felix Horn, the grandson of Olin Horn, has kept the rose garden so much. But this was built by J.W. Horn. Gladys, that's your grandfather. We don't know exactly when, but you know, somewhere in that time of the early time of Metcalf, and he sold it to his younger brother Olin, and Olin lived there for many decades, and then now Felix, Olin's grandson, is there, so it's certainly been in the Horn family a long time. And that's Mr. Olin and Miss Irene, probably after church that same day. And this is the Elma Horn house. It's further up on Hancock Street. And I remember as a child just thinking this was such an elegant house. Those Tuscan columns, you know, just really a very elegant house. And both Miss Elizabeth Horn and Miss Isabel Thomas were the most beautiful entertainers. You always wanted to go to what tea party they were having. And there's Elma and Elizabeth Horn. And now we come to the public buildings. Well, Peggy gave a very nice talk about the courthouse. And so we have the school. And the original school was in 1890 had 100, or in a few years after that, had 100 students. And it was a two-story building. And it was blown down in a bad storm. And my great-grandfather, Andrew Berry, was the principal of the school. And it was torn down, and in the early 1900s we have this one built. It had an interesting comment from Jeanette Horn McClendon, Jeanette Horn Lanier McClendon, and she had been a student here in first grade in 1925, and then she came back in 1941, I believe it was, and taught school, and the lunchroom was over here. Her classroom, she said, was in the second window here. So she would take everybody, and she taught 3rd to 6th grades. Boy, that's a lot. And she would take them over here to lunch. Then she would have to go back over here to the auditorium and heat the pork and beans cans in the stove in the auditorium and bring them back to the kids to have their lunch. And we didn't know where the pork and beans cans came from, but probably the government or the state, whatever. But anyway, that's how the school looked in the early days. It's not there anymore, and it's a shame because there's a wide field there. But these are some of the students of the school in 1920. You might recognize Lala Lee Davis there, the basketball team, I guess. And these are some students in the 30s. I think this is Jeanette. Whoops, go back here.
That was the Mule team.
That was Mule Day. I think that's Jeanette Horn right there. So many people have given us nice pictures. And this is a school bus with the wooden sides, you see? And the Thomas children waiting to, I think maybe the little one was too little to go. And these are children in the 40s. That was some of the school children. There's another picture of the school there. Can you imagine how warm it was? You know, the August or whatever. And there's a picture of the courthouse that we will see for real in the backyard here. And then we have the wonderful depot, and we're going to discuss that at length in just a minute, but that takes care of the public buildings in Metcalf. Now let's talk a little bit about the government, how it started. The town had a charter in October of 1889, and the first council meeting, as you see, was January 5th, 1891, and there were 5 or 6 men there, and you notice when you read who was there, they were all store owners, really. So I was reading the, this was like a piece of that yellow pad, you know, but faded, and it wasn't yellow, of course, just cream colored, and you could barely read it. And so I turned over and read the last side, and at the very end, my great-grandfather had signed as he was the clerk. So that was kind of a fun surprise for me. But one of the items on the agenda at the first council meeting was to have the clerk buy a decent record book, and I think they made a good suggestion. And I just want to say how wonderful the collection is that the Historical Society has here, because they had all these things that we could find, like the first meetings of the first council meeting in Metcalf. So they elected a mayor, and it was C.C. Wheeler, one of the store merchants. And before they could have the city ordinances even start, they had to get rid of, they had 2 things they had to do. They had to get rid of the house of prostitution, and they had to get a volunteer fire department. So that was established before the city ordinances. And don't you like that about the shade trees? And then you have unlawful for goats to run. Really. And you have your licenses that you have to get. So those are the city ordinances. And we want to start with, you know, we're talking about right now the first quarter of the 20th century in Metcalf. Everything was set up, everything was running perfectly, things were good. So about 1916, Mr. J.W. Horn decided Metcalf should have a bank. And this is the way it looked. This is actually, Dr. Oliver's son, Lou Oliver, did this architectural sort of drawing of the bank. It hangs in the bank today. But this is how the bank looked in downtown Metcalf. And everybody was very proud of the bank. It's interesting, they said the beginning of the bank, the day the bank was opened, it was the 23rd of July, I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, in 1916. And said nothing was going on much in Metcalf. There was no fanfare. There were a couple people playing checkers on the porch of one of the stores. So it opened without much fanfare. But I think what I really want to salute Mr. Horn, because in the 90th anniversary of the bank, a lot was written about it, and I found this particular article from the Thomasville magazine. But it talked about all the good people who helped start the bank. But I thought this about Mr. Horn was wonderful. Enlightened, practical financier of unusually good judgment, whose guiding genius during the early years was invaluable in the development and expansion of the bank. So certainly a solid foundation, as it says. And Gladys provided us with Mr. Horn's picture as a young person. I think he looks like he has a lot of promise, don't you? And this is his daughter, Gladys's mother, probably all students there at the school. This is some stationery the bank had some years ago telling about the Metcalf, and then, you know, when they came to the new bank building. And I think it was so neat that Joe Beverly this summer scheduled a bank meeting in the old bank building. Wasn't that neat? Really a neat happening. Now, Lila Lee Hicks Davis was probably the longest employee of the bank. She started with it in Metcalf, being a Metcalf girl. She started with it when she was quite young, a teenager, I suppose, and rose to being vice president here. So we couldn't say anything about the bank without saying Lila Lee. And in fact, people would say, I'm going to see Lila Lee. That meant they were going to the bank. She came from the Hicks family, and that's another cemetery in Metcalf, the Hicks Cemetery. And since it's so close to Veterans Day, I just have to salute Metcalf. Look at this. Largest oversubscription of quota for World War I. How about that? This was a ship that the Dixie Division went to France on. However, when they got there, the war was over. And they wrote a song about when the Dixie Division gets to France, but they didn't have to use their might. I think one of the most valuable things that we have in the history of Metcalf comes from Truman Holland. Do any of you remember Truman Holland? Probably do. But in the 60s, Truman Holland was interviewed and wrote a series of articles in the Times-Enterprise about Metcalf. He was brought to Metcalf in 1908 to be the principal of the school. You just saw the school building. And he was very good at that, and so good that in 1913 the people in Meigs hired him away from Metcalf. But in 1916 the bank remembered how good he was and said, come back and work at the bank. And of course he rose to be president and so forth when the bank moved to Thomasville in later years. But Truman Holland tells us a lot of things that happened in Metcalf in those years, and that's just tremendous for us to to have that information. He was saying that he was really complimenting not only the students but their parents. They were well trained, and they raised large families and had fine training at home. They've scattered far and wide, but wherever they've located, they've proved to be good citizens. This is one of the large families, the Dog Trot House. And then another thing Truman Holland says was race relations were really good. And he went out of his way to compliment that. You see Channel Hicks here with his playmates growing up. And this is just an example of a lot of people who had black people working in their households were just very, very fond of each other and almost like, members of the family. And he also said there was just plenty of food, that everybody was comfortable, warm, and it was just a really good atmosphere when he came to Metcalf, 1908. Here's the caning operation. Here's a caning more. This is Thanksgiving. They're cutting the turkey's head off. Plenty of food in. But then he was asked the question that everyone asked: what happened to Metcalf? Why did Metcalf fall on hard times? And so he gave about 8 reasons, Mr. Holland did, and then Lee Kelly added 1, and other people added about the popularity of South Florida, drew the train routes elsewhere. But probably the main reasons would be the boll weevil and the fever tick, because that forced businesses to have problems, and here the cotton gins closed and so forth. So that's in 1924, the commercial bank moved to Thomasville. So there you go, especially that the automobile would make it easy to come shopping. And Mr. Holland listed all these names of the families that he remembered, the time he was there. And it's just interesting that we have these names on file. If you're from that area, you'll probably see your name there. And these are the people, that he listed. These are just the people in Metcalf whose pictures we've been given. And I was so impressed at how well everyone was always dressed, And of course World War II, that's Skeets Thomas going to war in World War II. I love these pictures, particularly Miss Isabel here after church in the 30s. Irene and Olin Horn. And now here we talk about Thomas Drug Store. It's Bill Thomas that started Thomas Drug Store. His brothers, Elton and Gruva and Alton. And then the sisters, Tom Hill's, is this your aunt, Tom?
I'm not sure.
But the Kerrs had a wonderful drapery business and made everybody's draperies. And I believe Mattie Futch was Dr. Futch's wife, who lived on Linwood Drive and was a family doctor. And so just some of the Metcalf. This is Eloise Knapp, one of the Knapp family. That was 1930. Love this picture of Jeanette Horn McClendon here. Isn't it cute? And this is from their front yard with the picket fence. Remember the roses? This is the house with the roses. But the picket fence was there then. And this is, I told you a little bit about this person before, but this was John Caldwell, the sawmill owner's daughter, Kate. And she married a Hicks. And I just think she was the prettiest girl in Metcalf. And, you know, we always thought Julia Hicks and Lila Lee and Alice, they're all such pretty ladies, and of course Judy Carnell, their descendant now. They all kind of look like this Kate Caldwell Hicks. Now here are the Butlers. Judson Butler there, you see, with the smile, right, Carolyn? Carolyn's here. And what? The tall one on the left, okay. Right here. Well, Carolyn, who married Judson, really was not from Metcalf, but she has grown to be the glue that holds Metcalf together. I call her Mrs. Metcalf. And we don't have a lot about Mrs. Forrest. Unfortunately, I just didn't have any. I just was given the picture of Mrs. Forrest. So I need to get more information about her, but I was glad that someone thought enough to send us the picture. And this is Willie Hardy. Now, Willie Hardy became one of the most respected persons in the Metcalf community. He was born in 1895, and his father worked in the Neal place, which is New Hope Plantation, I think, now. And when he was, well, he married and then began working in with George Swift and El Soma and some of those areas. Actually, I think he also was manager of at one time one of the farms of the El Soma. But Willie became an ordained, well, first of all, he was licensed to preach in the 30s. He was a member of the Friendship Church where the cemetery is now. And then he was ordained in 1950, and he lived until about 1975 and preached, you know, here and there, and just a very, very well-respected person. And today the farms that, well, in 1944 he was able to get a pretty good deal of acreage and farmed, and today they have the farms called the Willie Hardy Farms that belong to him. This is his wife Lula. I love the hairstyle. And this is on the porch of the house. This is the house. And then we have some more Metcalf people, the Cones, the Chastains, Elton Thomas. And Metcalf had some lovely occasions. This was the wedding of Dorothy Horn, Dorothy Butler to Olin Horn, Dorothy Butler to Julian Horn, and Mr. Olin and Thomas Horn, Joe Horn's father, Olin Horn Jr. And this is Janice Horn Kelly. This is Lou Horn, who married Olin Horn Jr. And this is my grandmother, who played for all the weddings, Baptist and Methodist Church. And I mention that because the dress that she wore to all those weddings is now in the courthouse back there on a mannequin. So you have to look at that. And there I am as one of the flower girls. And this is one of the parties that took place in Metcalf. There's Lois Linnea Mason, who's opening the shop tomorrow. There's Rebecca Lanier Allen, and I think this is in Dorothy Horn's house, this party. The Butlers, this was, I think, the 50th anniversary for Miss Butler. And I just have to tell you about William Andrews. You know, do you know William Andrews that played for the Falcons, number 31?
Like Auburn.
Played for Auburn, you're absolutely right. And he was born in 1955, and I hate it when you Google it, said he was born in Thomasville, but he's really from Metcalf. And let it be known. And his mother sang in the church, sang in the choir of the Friendship Church for over 40 years. But anyway, his number was retired from the Falcons. He had a bad accident, sat out a couple of years, and then came back a year, but he just wasn't able to play anymore. But they retired his number, and it's still, as far as I know, has not been used. And there's one more athlete I have to tell you about. And I couldn't mention anything about Metcalf without mentioning the Roddenberrys. But one of the Roddenberry boys, Warren, was a real fine baseball player, and in fact made it to the minors and would have gone further had it not been the shoulder injury. And I'm looking at Brent as I'm talking. Well, anyway, Warren was playing ball, and Mr. Roddenberry, I don't think had ever gone to see his son play. I mean, he had 12 children. They were very busy bringing everybody up, and as far as I know, the story goes, he hadn't been to any of the games. So my grandfather took him over to Waycross, and I remember he said Heath Barnadoe was announcing over there the ball game, and it was a doubleheader, and they came just for the second game. And they had won, Metcalf had won, or I don't think it was Metcalf, it was whoever Warren was playing for at the time, had won. Thomasville, okay, good.
Teammate of mine.
Hmm?
He was a teammate of mine.
Oh.
I was a senior, he was a sophomore.
Oh, okay. So they were playing the game in Waycross, and you correct me if this isn't the right story, Paul. But as I heard it, so they were playing, and Warren had pitched the first game, and they had won, of course, because he was a good pitcher. And the second game came, Warren wasn't pitching. So Mr. Roddenberry said, and they weren't doing well. So Mr. Roddenberry said, "Now I want to go talk to my boy. You know, they got to put him in, make him pitch, because you know, then they'll start winning." So Mr. Roddenberry went down there and talked to the coach, and sure enough, they put Warren in the second game, and they started doing well. Nobody was making any runs, but Warren was pitching well. So then Mr. Roddenberry said, "Now wait, I got to go down there and talk to my son." And he went down, he said, "Son, you got to start knocking." And so I don't know who won the game, but I just can remember the story about Mr. Roddenberry going to the ball game. So those are the two athletes. Brent, you got something?
Could you go back about 3 pictures?
Okay, and we go back, and Mr. Groover, you know, Thomas became the commissioner, and the big event of the mid-century was the opening of the road, the paved road, the building of the road, and the paving of it. So this tells about, this was from Lee Kelly's column in the paper, and of course, you couldn't have any event in Metcalf without having dinner on the grounds. So there they are, you know, celebrating the road. Now we come to the 1960s, when the sawmill was destroyed and quickly rebuilt, as I understand it. And in the 70s, the people that had started that Heritage Society were trying to get Metcalf on the National Register of Places. And so they thought if the depot goes, and at that time it was being sold to somebody, and they thought if the depot goes and is moved away, you know, there's no way we're going to get on the register. Because this is kind of how Metcalf looked at the time. You see Mrs. Harville's store there. Ms. Harville's granddaughter's here today. Mrs. Harville had her store in the bank building there. And, but, you know, Metcalf had to have the depot to be recognized. You know, it still had the courthouse at that time, too. So the word was, as I understand it, that the man withdrew his offer and said, okay, if it's historically correct, you know, I'll give up my offer of buying and moving the depot, and we'll begin to restore the depot. And and PW can tell us later if it's wrong, but I was told that the Mrs. Chastain and Dorothy Horn and several people bought the depot back for $1,000, and then they were trying to persuade the Paul Bryan lumber company to
Yeah, actually, we bought the building for $500.
oh my goodness, a real bargain.
It was a 95% restoration. It's in that bad a shape.
Yeah, 95% restoration, he's saying. And during that time period, they collected a few stories about the train and the depot and so forth. And Mr. Olin Horn was saying they used to drop the mail out. You know, they'd go real quickly and just drop the mail out in the early morning from the train. And a lot of times it would get under the train, and there the mail would get all messed up. And he told about a plantation man who was expecting $1,000 check to come, and he went early in the morning to get that money before it got under the train. But sure enough, it went under the train, and the tidbits of $1,000 check were all up and down the railroad. Now you see, it needed that 95% restoration, didn't it? Can you believe it? And now they started restoring it. And what an undertaking. And I think Paul wanted to recognize Henry Wooten, who was from a construction family who, did this beautifully, did the construction so beautifully. And so instead of naming it the Bryan Depot, he wanted to name it the Wooten Depot, which was magnanimous and very, very nice. And Mr. Wooten said, Bryan wanted everything authentic, so Wooten used most of the timber still in the building and matched what was missing with precisely cut pieces of timber from the mill. So it is just a wonderful finish to something that started. Metcalf made the National Register. We have the lumber company here with its president out front. And you see the old depot and now the new depot, it's very similar. And could we turn the light on just a minute, Joe? And we would ask Paul if he would come forward, and Brent to come.
Come over. The Metcalf Heritage Society, which has been working to try to help reinvigorate some of the preservation activities there. Wanted to honor some individuals today with the first annual or ever Metcalf Heritage Society Trailblazer Awards. So this is presented to P.W. Bryan for exceptional efforts towards preservation and revitalization of historic Metcalf, as evidenced by the restoration and, most importantly, the adaptive use of the Metcalf Depot, because without that adaptive use, it would probably just be an open public building or something like that, but it's currently being used and cared for and was just got a fresh paint job. So all these many years later, that effort that was undertaken at that time is really kind of the linchpin that holds historic Metcalf together. So thank you for doing that.
Well, it was truly a labor of love, and we tried to put it back exactly, except for we had to change the inside, but the outside was identical to the original, and it is on the National Register of Historical Places. We bought the mill in 1975, and if I'm not mistaken, we moved into the depot in 1978, maybe, and it was my office for 27 years. I didn't retire, but I sold the business. My partner and I did in 2005, so I was there 30 years. And the mill that's there today is not, the old mill burned. We had a fire in, I think it was 1994 or 5, and we built a high-tech sawmill back. I think we spent like $18 million on just the sawmill. But it's fully computerized. If you've never been through it, you should go as a guest and go through it. They'll let you have a catwalk above everything, so you can. It's really a nice sawmill, and the people that own it now from Mississippi, Mr. Warren Hood, bought it. And my son still works with them. And I couldn't talk him out of it. He just loves what he was doing, and he said he was going to stay. So they were nice enough to keep him. But it's a really nice sawmill and a great addition for Metcalf, so I think you'd enjoy seeing it. I appreciate the award.
We're just really proud of you and proud of the fact that you just stepped forward and did this, because we don't know where Metcalf would be today as far as the preservation situation if that hadn't been done. Let's see. I'm going to turn the program over to Brent, and he is going to bring you up from 1978 to the present.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be brief, so I know we have refreshments waiting. But, you know, for the people that live in Metcalf and have lived there for a long time, like the Butlers and the Horns, you know, Metcalf's just fine, I think. It's, you know, they probably like to have a general store or whatnot, but it's their home and it's a nice place to live. And I think, you know, as Teresa's talk shows, the story of Metcalf is the story of America from the time of Metcalf's founding, and it really does matter. The National Trust had a campaign, This Place Matters, a national campaign where people took pictures of places that mattered, but we don't have time. We're too busy trying to do stuff to do that, but I think Metcalf does matter. It matters to so many people, and we're so proud of the work that's been done both by the original Metcalf, I think, Heritage Society, and then now the Metcalf Community Association is currently working to just give activities and kind of bring life back to the community. They have hay rides and fish fries and things like that. But why now? We started working in late 2008 because the Georgia Trust has a program called Places in Peril. And I don't know, everybody likes Metcalf, but it was kind of need a little shot in the arm, I think, as far as the downtown and the preservation, because it's been on the National Register for over 30 years. But not much preservation work has really been done there. And we don't really talk about preservation in our kind of rural communities, and the fact that there are tax credits for people that do work to restore the old buildings down there, just very important incentive to do so. But in late 2008, the Georgia Trust said that their new program, or the next year's Places in Peril program, would come with grants. So I thought, well, there's a way to bring some money to this and do something. So we applied for a grant, and we were able to hire a consultant to do some visioning with the community and talk about the future. And that helped get the Metcalf Community Association restarted. We did some planning, and I encourage you to look at the signboards that we have over here as far as just showing what the buildings could look like if they were fixed up some. I don't know if this is that slide. The top is the current, well, the top is what it looked like 2 years ago. The bottom is kind of a vision showing, you know, fresh paint, signboards, crosswalks, trees, and things like that. Just kind of bridge that imagination gap between what is there now and what could be there. So we used that money, and things started moving along a little bit. And then later Teresa came and had the idea of starting a Metcalf Heritage Society for people who don't currently live in Metcalf as a way to support those who do. Because there's a lot of support both in Thomasville and around the country for Metcalf because of the fond memories. So the Metcalf Heritage Society was formed, and they've been raising money and doing a few things. We encourage you to join that organization. It's $30 a year, and the money that has been raised through memberships and donations is being put to good use to, we're currently going after up to a $500,000 grant right now through the DOT to do some downtown streetscape improvements. One of the ideas that came out of the visioning session was putting the E back in Metcalf. I noticed in the 60s that one of the articles Teresa had, it didn't have an E, so it must have started disappearing maybe when modernism was really popular. But we lost the E, so what is the E? Economy, enthusiasm, energy, everybody. Just putting the E back in Metcalf and bringing it back to life. So again, fortunately, the DOT put a call for grants. They haven't done one of these in 6 years, but the transportation enhancement grants. So the other signboard I have shows a conceptual rendering for the downtown that basically just shows some streetscape improvements. And really the goal would be to calm the traffic, to slow down the trucks going through there. and working with the lumber mill to move their weights so that they don't have to park in that lot right across from these buildings that you see here. So we'll be putting that grant together, and the county is generously sponsoring it, although we'll be raising the matching funds separately for that. But that will give another kind of beautification to Metcalf and also serve to hopefully as an incentive for others to restore their buildings or lease them or sell them to get those businesses back in there, to really make that a self-sustaining community down there. And voila, the place where we had our first meeting with Mark McDonald, the president of the Georgia Trust, in December 2008 during a horrible rainstorm, the old bank building. Tom Harrison recently completed restoration of the bank, as Teresa mentioned, and this is what it looks like today. We couldn't find any original photographs, so the recessed doorway was interpreted in such a way that made sense for the formality of the building. So it's really a great thing for Metcalf. And you know, the important thing is really to support the community that's there. They're the ones that live there, the ones that maintain their houses, that do the work. And so Thomasville Landmarks is committed to helping those rural communities in any way that we can. And fortunately, with people like Teresa and Gladys and Gal Baby and Darlene Cayley, they've kind of been driving the Metcalf Heritage Society forward. So we're really happy to be working with people that are so dedicated to the community. At this time, I would like to ask Tom and Holly Harrison to come forward. So the Metcalf Heritage Society would like to recognize their efforts. And the certificate is for the restoration of the old Bank of Metcalf building. And Gladys will be presenting. Sorry, did I steal your thunder?
I want to say a few words about this man here. He has been so energetic and enthusiastic about this venture and has been the liaison, and a wonderful one at that, between the Metcalf Historical Society and the Metcalf Community Association. He started restoring this bank, and I had taken my children and my grandchildren to Metcalf separately through the years, and I said, and that was your great-grandfather's bank. And they said, that's a bank? You know how it is now? I said, yes, it was. And Wendy, my daughter, just told me today that she had previously met you somewhere in Tallahatchie. She said, I met the man that's restoring that bank. And I had no idea that she had met you. And Holly, but I am just so pleased that they have done this. And I almost bought your home. I wanted to buy it when I saw the virtual tour. Did you all see that on the internet? What they have done to their house, I thought, oh, Metcalf's coming back and I could do a B&B again, you know. But then with my mom just going to the retirement home today, that's why I looked wide-eyed and looked at, I'd be too far away from Thomasville. Otherwise, I would really have liked to have pursued that. Tom, we just can't thank you and Holly enough for your exceptional efforts toward working with us in Metcalf. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom.
I just want to thank you for the award. We do love Metcalf, and we've poured our hearts into it. And you know, it's been a labor of love. Holly and I have worked side by side, and you know, restoring our house. And you know, we bought the bank 5 years ago. It became available, and with no real intention of doing anything other than just making sure it wound up in the right hands is kind of the concept that we had. We wanted to preserve it, and so we just kind of held it in a state of stabilization until Lois basically approached us. We've been talking with Lois for probably over a year. she's kind of floated balloons to us, and it just kind of all came together, and it kind of, I guess, is a Lollapalooza effect of all the planning that's been going on. And with the help of Brent and Landmarks, we have applied for all of the tax credits that are available, and it is a fabulous incentive to be able to do that. And it helps to make financial sense because otherwise to do pure restoration like we've tried to do is you know, it takes a lot of resources to do that. And so we're very proud of what we now own, and you know, we look forward to seeing progress continuing to be made in the future. So thank you. Thanks, Brent.
And I guess Lois is here, and is Bros here as well. Would they come up? So this is really, you know, two different buildings restored about 30 years apart, but putting those to use is really the key. And I think, as Tom said, having a business in there that can work out of it's kind of a small building.
Very tiny.
It's tiny. Yeah.
Good things come in small packages.
Yeah, exactly. It's really delightful. Please, I think you'd be happy if people stop by, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
To see it. Now, here you're going to serve coffee in the morning. Is that right?
We've heard that too.
So if you're in town, stop by and ask for it. But, this award is presented to Lois Lanier and Roswell K. Mason, also for their exceptional efforts towards preservation and revitalization, as evidenced by the opening of, and I put decorative fabrics.
That's right.
In the old Bank of Metcalf building. And I put Bank of Metcalf because when Tom was doing the restoration, he uncovered under some silver paint on the old vault. It says Bank of Metcalf very clearly, and so I think that's what I used on these certificates. So
and it's spelled with an E.
It does have an E on it. That's right. So congratulations, and thank you very much for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this has been lots of fun, and I just have to tell you that it's something I've wanted to do since I started my business 27 years ago. I wanted to be in Metcalf because I grew up there, and for whatever reason it didn't work out at the time, but when I learned that Tom owned the building, every time I saw him I thought, I want your building. So economy going bad, we needed to downsize, but we're downsizing, so it just turned out to be a good thing all the way around, a win-win. So I told Tom we were ready to move to Metcalf, and he got it ready, did a beautiful job, and we're so excited to be there, and would just love for everybody to come see us and see what a beautiful job Tom has done. And I know you need some new drapery, so we'll be looking for you. Thank you.
That basically concludes the presentation. I do want to say that I think it's great, the partnership between the building owner and a tenant, and I think that's really what's going to take to make Metcalf work, as well as the tax credits and any other grants or incentives we can get. We do have refreshments out at the old courthouse, and Ephraim has done a really great exhibit showing some of the collection and a couple of dresses and some other things in the courthouse. So please wander to the back of the property when we conclude here. On the table, we do have sign-up sheets if you're interested in at least being notified of what the Metcalf Heritage Society is doing. Please sign up there. And we also have a couple of newsletters, the 2 newsletters for this year that they've done, just to let people know what's going on in Metcalf. Also, we are producing a DVD disc of the Metcalf presentation today. It will include Teresa's entire presentation and a lot of additional photographs and other things that were not used today. For this, there's also a sign-up sheet on the table. The DVDs are going to be $21. That $21 will be split evenly between the Metcalf Heritage Society, the producer of the DVD, and the Thomas Historical Society. So $21 if you pick it up here, or $25 if you want it sent to you. Payment in advance is appreciated. And with that, we will conclude the program. Thank you so much for coming, and please enjoy the refreshments.
That was great because we really didn't want to get up here until things come back for refreshments.